Welcome to the Unlocking the Club podcast, where we host honest and direct conversations about journeys of access, personal truth, and reclaiming space. We share our truth so that you can find the key to own your truth, honor your journey, and reclaim your space. Grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and invite your friends to meet you at the club. Here's your host, Angela Taylor.
Hey everyone, hello again. I'm Angela Taylor, your host for Unlocking the Club. And on today's episode, I want to start out a little bit by unlocking the importance of a dad's love, or the love of a male figure in your life, particularly for Black women. And we're going to do this as we amplify National Play with Dad Day, which is celebrated annually on November 25th. And so I did a little bit of a Google search about National Play with Dad Day. Someone had told me about it a few weeks ago, and I got excited about being able to have this conversation for a few different reasons, but mainly because I know many of you have experienced on this show. I talk all the time about my family, specifically speak quite often about my mother, and I felt like this was a great opportunity well before Father's Day to talk about my dad and the role he's played in my life as well. So I did a quick Google search on National Play with Dad Day to find out a little bit more about the genesis of this holiday or National Day of Recognition. It seems like there's one every single day right now. But I read this excerpt from the website, and it said, throughout history and all over the world, mothers have always been regarded as the primary caretakers of children. Parenthood starts with mothers, but it doesn't have to end with them. For centuries, fathers took the back seat and resorted to simply providing for the family. There was a time when this division of roles was essential for our survival, but it's not anymore. The article went on to say, in the 20th century, men were not allowed to attend births or support mothers through labor. Men found that it wasn't their place, and women didn't want their husbands or the fathers of the children to see them in that way. Some fathers would go to a bar until the ordeal was over. And in the 1950s, very few hospitals encouraged men to join in on the process, but the notable changes began in the 1960s. It was only then that fathers were allowed to actually stay in the room during labor. And in the 70s and 80s, they were allowed to attend their child's birth. The perspective began to shift from there. The article went on to say, there is tremendous progress for new fathers who are becoming more involved in caring for their households. More and more parents have a dual income, splitting their household chores and childcare. A 2016 study found that 16% of American fathers were stay-at-home dads, and that only 27% of couples with young children had fathers as their sole breadwinners. Fathers are now spending 8 hours a week caring for children and 10 hours doing household chores. There is still much work to do, as many families still see childcare as a woman's job. And so this holiday is one step forward towards encouraging fathers to take on a more active role in caring for their children. Now, probably like you, when I read that for the first time, and even as I just read it to you all, I have a lot of different feelings and thoughts that are going through my mind. I think there's a lot of societal norms and standards that are layered into those expectations. We don't talk about how, historically marginalized or excluded families and nuclear families are navigating these spaces. We don't talk about the presence of Black women. Oftentimes, they are the breadwinner and the caretaker in many situations, not just for their children, but probably for their parents as well. So there's a lot of things that wasn't necessarily captured in that blurb, but I thought that the concept was an interesting space that I wanted to talk about on today's show, so that we can celebrate dads and fathers, or those role models, male role models that are in many of our lives. And the catalyst for this was actually a text that I received from a dear friend who I think is a wonderful father. But this text motivated me to think about my own relationship with my father. And his text read, and he asked me, from my perspective as a daughter, what is the value of a father? And wow, that was such a powerful question for so many reasons. I had to pause, and instead of responding via text, I had to call him up to get a little bit of context for why this question was coming up for him, and what was it that he needed to know, or what was going on. And I talked about how important my relationship with my dad has been throughout my life for so many reasons. And as a Black woman, how important it has been for me to have someone in my life who says, I love you, who shows what a father and a man's love is like, who values me, sees me fully, and all of those different things. And so I shared that with my friends, how important my dad and my father has been in my life. And I recognize that again on the show, I don't talk about my relationship with my dad as much as I do with my relationship with my mother. And I do know that it is equally as impactful on who I become. And so I want to share with you some of those most important moments that impacted who I am today. And many of them actually happened when I was a young girl. And so this is one of the things that I told my friend was that in those formative years of how I interacted with my father and how he interacted with me taught me so many lessons about how I should expect to be treated later on in life, but certainly about who I was and what was special about me as a little girl and later on as a woman. And so I thought back to that first moment when actually we were living in Torrejon or Madrid, Spain. My father was stationed at Torrejon Air Force Base right outside of Madrid. And my parents chose to have us live in Madrid so that we got the full cultural experience. And so my first encounter with sports was actually playing t-ball. I remember watching my brothers the year before when we first moved to Spain playing baseball and wanting to participate as well. And so my parents signed me up that next year for t-ball. And my screensaver actually on one of my cell phones is actually a picture of me playing t-ball. But one of the games that still to this day taught me a really important lesson, and it was a lesson that, again, my father taught me was during this game, the umpire didn't show up. So they needed somebody in the stands to come out and umpire the game. And so I saw my father raise his hand. He jumped over the fence and ran behind the plate and was going to umpire the game. And so I remember stepping up to bat and swinging off the tee. And I think it was probably my best hit of my, short career in t-ball up until that point. Went way out to the outfield, barely hit the fence. And as I had a big smile on my face and was running to first base, I heard the umpire say, "You're out." And I was like, what? And I had to be like 5 years old. So I didn't understand all the rules of baseball. But the umpire said, "You're out because you stepped outside of the batter's box." And so here I was in that moment saying, wait a minute, that's my dad. Dad, this is my best hit ever. And it felt like semantics that I stepped outside the batter's box. We were playing t-ball, for heaven's sake, right? But in that moment, he demonstrated something that has been a principle for our family for as long as I can remember, and that is integrity. He's a military man. And so I learned about loyalty, honesty, and integrity. And that was one of those moments that he showed up fully. In that moment, he wasn't going to, look the other way just because this was his daughter, but he was going to play by the rules. There was another one when we came back to Idaho, and I remember being in the backyard. My mother wasn't home. I remember being in the backyard, and my brothers were playing football. They were playing catch with my dad. And so, I came outside the house and jumped right in line with them to play catch. And he threw me the passes just as hard as he was throwing them to my brothers and trusted that I would be able to catch the ball and didn't take it easy on me as a little girl. And I think that showed up in my passion and love for sports for so long, was that I knew I could do anything that I put my mind to. And it was because not just my mother, but my father and my brothers believed that to be true as well. And I think that my father led the way in kind of generating that spirits and spunk that I had in me. So there's so many stories that I could share. There's some funny stories. My first time drinking alcohol, my dad was one of those Scotch on the Rocks guys, and he also was the best curator of Kool-Aid at picnics and cookouts. And so I remember spending some time with my dad at a cookout because I was his taste tester. There was one year we were at the park and he was making a huge Gatorade cooler full of Kool-Aid. And so, he would put some sugar in it, give me the cup to taste it, and we would go from there. Well, this time I wasn't paying any attention, and he gave me a cup, and I thought it was the cup of Kool-Aid. So I took a huge slurp of that cup of Kool-Aid, and it wasn't Kool-Aid. It was some scotch on the rocks, and it was disgusting. I couldn't talk. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to throw up in that moment. And it's probably the reason that I don't drink to this day. My first experience drinking alcohol was not a pleasant one. And to this day, we joke about it all the time. It probably was that moment that had me to not think about or desire to drink alcohol in the future. But so many moments that I had with my father that were so important and critical to who I am and how I show up today. And I think that that is certainly the case for many people, even those who have a single parent family, even those who are raised in a household with their grandfather or grandparents or their uncle plays a large role in their life. It is so important for fathers to step up. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that on today's episode. So I brought on a special guest to have this discussion. So our special guest on today's episode of Unlocking the Club is Edward Kim. Today on Unlocking the Club, I will be joined by Edward Kim. Ed is a coach, consultant, and trainer with expertise in leadership, emotional intelligence, intercultural competence, and aligning intentions to the impact leaders and teams want to have. He has helped leaders and teams clarify their North Star and utilize emotions as critical data points when making decisions and leading. He's a certified Everything DISC, the Intercultural Development Inventory, and is in the process of completing the Retained Parental Leave Coaching certification. Ed received his master's in social organizational psychology from Teachers College at Columbia University and a bachelor in science in sport management from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He currently lives in New Jersey with his partner Sarah and their son Ernie. Thanks for tuning in as we unlock the club with Edward Kim. Edward, how are you doing?
Hey, Angela, I am doing great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us on the show. We know that our producers, we were talking a little bit before the show about like how many male guests have you had on the show? And there's been a handful. We had Mario Shane about a month and a half ago, and we had John Lippman, Dr. John Lippman, MD, talk about uterine fibroid embolization. And you're our third male guest, and on purpose, because I want to talk about fatherhood and how important a role that fathers play in the lives of their children and with their spouses or partners and others. And you are someone, Edward, that I really respect how candid and honest you have been about your journey into fatherhood. But before we get to that, what else should our listeners know about who Edward Kim is?
Well, let's take things on two sides. One on the professional side. I'm just somebody who has a passion to make work not be so awful. The experience of work for so many of us is one that we feel like we have to do, not that we want to do, and that's not even what I'm hating on. It's just that when you have to be at work and the experience drains your batteries so much, you have less to give to yourself and to everything else around you in your life. And I think there's something unfortunate about that. And so if we're going to spend as much time as many of us spend at work, the relationship we have with work should be one that is giving back to us at least a little bit. Because certainly I know that many of us give so much to our work and so many of us don't receive anything in return. And you hear so much about burnout these days. And I haven't done the research and I haven't read too much research on this, but I have a suspicion that whenever we identify burnout in work culture today, it's when it's gotten really out of hand already.
Yes.
So prevention of burnout is not what we can do at that point, right? It's really now intervening and, how do we really help this person who just is wiped out and probably not in a good headspace, right? And so we shouldn't get to that point, right? Like the norm in I think in this country right now is that most people who work operate on burnout level.
Yes.
When burnout becomes really, really hard, we say something and then we label that burnout. So I think cultural norms of workplaces are that we operate at burnout. That's normal for the way most of us work. And when that gets out of hand, we call it out and call it burnout. But I think the whole workplace needs to really evolve and needs to change because I just don't think it's healthy. And quite honestly, I think if we can make the workplace healthier, it's not going to hurt our revenues. It's not going to hurt our you know, stock prices. Actually believe it would help. And I think there's research that speaks to that. So that's on the professional end. I just want to continue doing work with leaders, coaching, organizations, consulting, doing workshops, training to support work not being so awful, right? And I think that's all about the soft skills, which are the hard skills.
Right.
On a personal level, I am a diehard sports fan. Today is actually opening night for St. John's men's basketball, and although I did not go to school there, that's my team. They have not been very successful over the years as I've been a fan, but they're my team. And so, on a personal level, Angela, you mentioned that my bachelor's degree was in sport management. I'm a sports nut for most of my life. Baseball was my first love. I hope that I can teach aspects of baseball to Ernie. Whether he likes it or not, we'll see. But I think there's good lessons to learn amidst a lot of sports and a lot of the play involved in sports and the camaraderie, even individual sports. I think there's so much to learn, not just about the game, but how you live your life, how you work, how you relate to other people. So big sports fan.
Yeah, I know. I think that's one of the places that you and I initially connected. We do some similar work, and Edward was someone who was an expert in the intercultural development inventory. And when I was starting that journey a few years ago, I reached out to Edward for some tips and encouragement, and exercises that I could utilize as I started to use that tool with my clients. And I appreciate how open you were to sharing your gifts and your expertise and your experiences and your knowledge, and how much I enjoyed actually being able to talk about our mutual love for sports. And it sounds like that is one of the things that you want to be able to create and co-create with your new son, Ernie, which you just had recently with your partner, Sarah.
Correct. Yeah. No. He was born on April 26th, and he's a little bit more than 6 months old now. But if sports are something that he wants to get into, I would love to teach him, or bare minimum, I would love to just like literally just play with him, whatever the sport may be. And I don't know, this is not by intention, but he does happen to enjoy, like he likes to play with balls. And so we've been like tossing balls into his chest and he's having a blast with it. I've been pretending to juggle, which by the way, I can't juggle. So he watches me and he cracks up, which when he laughs, it's adorable and it's hilarious at the same time. And so I've been pretending to juggle quite a bit these past few days so that he could have a nice chuckle at me.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the juxtaposition of what you shared earlier about your where you are in life, right? The corporate coaching aspect
Mm-hmm.
of taking a look at these systems and the structures that we navigate out of alignment with being in wellness, right? Where we're prioritizing getting things done and getting things done quickly, and perfection and all those things that aren't healthy, and until burnout hits us. And we don't really respond to it until we're debilitated by it,
Yeah.
right? And then on the other side of that, what I appreciate is how candid and honest you've been with some of us in your circle about being a first-time father. And I think there's a lot of things that both of those have in common, is that oftentimes we suffer in silence of what we are navigating and going through. We don't feel compelled or that safe space to actually share the real. And I think
Mm.
that one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show in particular, was because you've been really honest and candid about your journey to becoming a father for the first time and what that experience has been like thus far.
Yeah, I mean, even the path to fatherhood for me was one where that was very intentional. You know, Sarah and I really, we've been married 10 years, and you think about we like to normalize timelines for some reason, right? And so like you get married and you're supposed to have kids pretty immediately, and then you have a house with a white fence, and then all of a sudden a dog appears and all this other.
Of course.
We didn't follow any of that, and so we were married for 10 years. To the extent that all of our parents stopped asking us, "Are you guys going to have kids?" Because they were just like, they don't respond. They get annoyed every time we ask. I guess they're not going to have kids, and we hit a point where we became open to the idea, and I don't even know how we got to that point, but we just got open to the idea. And again, this past April, we had our Ernie, and it's been great, and it's been really hard, right? Like there's that balance of that. There's the tension of that duality. There's that friction that exists between the two, and there's certain days where the good parts of it easily overwhelm the difficult parts of it, and then there's other days, for me anyways, where the difficult parts are just, and I think this might be where it compelled me to share with you and others. It's just so hard. Like
Yeah.
caring for a newborn is just so hard, and you need to release some of that pressure at some point, and you don't even realize that you're holding that pressure until you share, and you share a little bit, and that little bit allows you to share a little bit more. And one thing, as you were kind of asking me that question, that I started to think about was, why hadn't I previously had more of these conversations with family and friends as a new father? Because I hadn't had that conversation with family and friends. I had it with Sarah, and then I had it with you, and the community that we share. It wasn't a natural topic of conversation that came up, right? And I think that's something, maybe, as we're talking about, that needs to be unearthed a little bit, and needs to be normalized, is that the birthing mother should absolutely have all the support in the world. None of this takes away from any of that. And partner, father also needs some support, and we need to normalize having that conversation, and asking how that person is doing, and being curious to that person's experience for all of this, because this is um, easily the hardest transition that I've ever gone through in my life, right? It's like my identity has been flipped upside down during this period of time, in ways that I couldn't have anticipated. And there's aspects of mourning that I've gone through. Like, I remember when Ernie was born, I think it was right around the time when the Game of Thrones, I guess it might have been the prequel, or I forgot what it was, but something around Game of Thrones was coming out.
Mhm.
And Sarah and I have been avid Game of Thrones watchers to this point, and like, that was just not going to be on the table, right? And neither was any sports, neither was like other shows that we wanted to watch, neither was going to the movie theater. There was just all of a sudden, like, all those things that I used to do with ease, even like going out for a walk in the evenings, and the relationship I had with her, even. I'm mourning the loss of all of that, because overnight now, all of these things are different. And it's not worse or better, it's different. And it takes time for me to transition internally with those things that are different in now my external environment, right? And so that was the part that took me, and it's still taking me. I'm still going through it. That transition. That's been the process that I've been on.
Yeah, well, and thank you for the vulnerability, saying yes to be on the show to share this story, because I think it's a really important conversation that both men and women, or those that identify as male or female, or parents, are having at different degrees. And wanted to have you on because I think that for the first time, you were someone that got really naked, if you will, in sharing the grief, right? And it's something I have a lot of friends and colleagues and cousins and family members that have children, who you sense that there are some things that you have to trade off to give up. You can't do it all. But we spend more time talking about and sharing photos of those great moments, and not enough time actually pondering the grief that is taking place. And as this episode drops, the previous episode a week ago, we have a great conversation with the author, Marisa Renee Lee, who wrote the book, Grief is Love.
Mm.
And in the book, she's talking about, right, the loss of someone in your life. And for her, it was her mother. For me, most recently, it was my mother. But I also think that all of us at some stage in our journeys are grieving the loss of something, whether it's a job that you had that maybe you got fired from, or that company is no longer in existence and people got laid off. Maybe it's you had to move back to a certain city. So you're grieving the excitement of being in New York City. Like, right, I think there's all these things that are true that we feel like we have to ignore, right? Because we feel bad for feeling that way. And I wonder how much of the expectation that others have of you as a father prevented you from actually being okay with sharing your story and your truth.
Absolutely. I think because we're blessed with a healthy young baby, with a healthy newborn, it's like if I'm to say anything about the hardship that I might be experiencing, it's almost like shame on you. Like you have this beautiful, healthy child, and you're complaining about a personal experience that you're going through. Like suck it up, deal with it, right? Like you're blessed, right? As if you can't have both be true at the same time, right? Like I know I'm blessed. I know I'm privileged because Ernie had a good birth. He's healthy. He's developmentally on the right track. Yeah, 100%. And there's days where I'm like, I don't know that I don't know that I want to be a dad right now. Like maybe I just wanted to enjoy another part of my life today. I mean, I know I can't do that, right? Like, I know the difference between what was just an idea in my head and I have to still be responsible. So I'm not advocating like removing responsibility, but I can't deny the fact that my head goes to different spaces around. I wish today I didn't have to take those responsibilities on. I wish today I wish I could just go golfing today. Today is beautiful out. Maybe I want to go golfing. Man, oh man, do I want to go to an all-inclusive resort and just hang out on the beach all day long. I can't do that. Are these things relatively like maybe not that of a big deal? They aren't probably. I get that. But maybe they're just things that I want
Yeah.
and I can't have, right? And so, I don't know that I think we can grieve. I think I can grieve those things. And I think part of it is I had to become, and I'm continuing to become more comfortable just owning the fact that, yeah, like those are parts of me that sometimes I want to do those things. And, I let my mind wander into like, what if Ernie wasn't here? Right. Like, and that's, again, I don't want anybody to misinterpret. I'm ecstatic that he's here.
Yeah.
And you have those moments, right? One does not cancel the other out. I think is such an important thing that I've learned in this situation and in other aspects of my life with different things, right? Like sometimes we think that if the existence of one thing means the other thing can't be there, when minimally those two things oftentimes are at play together. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, no, for sure.
Well, and it's tough to reconcile that. Like I'll be candid and honest. Like I had the privilege and the pleasure for the last 7 years um, to be here to take care of my parents and specifically my mother, right? And then I talk about all the time how important those moments were and how much of a joy it was to be able to get to know her in a different light. And there were those moments, like, right, where I was exhausted, where I just needed some time to myself, where, I wish that like I didn't have to worry about having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and take someone to treatment, like, right. Like, and you feel this guilt for feeling that. And I remember having a conversation with my mother where she acknowledged the thing that helped me was she's like, I know you're giving up a lot to do this, and I hope you know how much I appreciate it. And I think as a society, we do not allow ourselves or give each other the grace to have both of those competing thoughts, right? That we can still be 100% faithful and loyal and committed to our loved ones and grieve those moments that you're missing, or to feel like, what if, right? In that same time, because if we don't deal, it's not going away. That feeling is not going away. And as a matter of fact, if it feels like a burden, at some point it may come back to haunt us.
100%. I mean, you talk about those experiences that we have early in life that in our formative years that has an impact on how we like show up today in the world.
Yeah.
I think some of those experiences when we are so raw and when we're having a moment that we're, individually vulnerable or just in a moment of extreme transition, if we don't allow ourselves to acknowledge those moments and to face those moments, it's not like those that feeling stays with us, and it stays with us, I believe, until another point in life when it has another opportunity to come out again. And usually when it comes out again down the line, comes out a little bit harsher with little bit sharper teeth. At least it has for me when I've tried to shoo it away.
Yeah.
Like the whole shooing away thing, I learned probably over the past like 10 years or so, doesn't work, right? Like I know like personal insecurities or imposter syndrome feelings. Early in my career, I always tell myself like just reinforce myself with a positive message, right? Like I can do this, or I am capable of doing that, or whatever the message, right? And I'll just repeat it to myself as if that was going to make the negative part go away. When I learned that I need to face the negative part, almost like put that negative part in a chair, let it sit across from me and have a conversation with it, right? Like for me to be curious about like, why are you showing up negative part? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell me in this moment? Um, what do you need from me in this moment? Um, how have you helped me in the past without me having thanked you? And having this dialogue. And as I've learned to have that dialogue with myself, um, I've let myself reconcile myself to those parts because those parts are still me. It's not like there's somebody else's. It's my stuff.
Yeah.
And the more I can reconcile my stuff, I'm better for it. And as it relates to being a father, the more I can reconcile that stuff with myself around my grief or where I wish I was sometimes, or how I feel about certain days, that helps me be a better father who's present with Ernie. And so now I have been trying to make sure that I don't give myself an easy way out by saying I'm too tired to deal with that. I want to make sure that in the moment I deal with as many of those parts of myself as possible, because I know long term he will feel the benefit of that work that I do now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It feels like you have given yourself permission to not be perfect, to not have perfect thoughts all the time, right? And to, again, grieve, feel sorry for yourself, wish that there was something else you could do. And modeling that in your relationship for Sarah and for Ernie will be incredibly important. And the reason why, again, wanted to have this conversation with you, Edward, because I thought it was really powerful. Like I haven't seen someone so raw and candid and honest with what is going on in their journey. And you can sense that there was this pain and frustration, right, that you're going through, not because of the circumstances, but because of like, should I feel this way? Do I have the permission to feel this way? And I think one of the things I want to unlock today for parents, for caretakers, is that we do have permission to feel that. And if you can recognize that and how you're feeling, I think it makes you an even better caretaker or better father or mother or aunt or uncle in that moment, because those moments that you do have to spend with them, you appreciate them even more, right, in that moment. But I want to kind of pivot back to, because I think you've made an important decision too, that I think is something to unpack along the way. And that is that you're a stay-at-home father. And so, kind of heard in the opening when I was reading about National Play with Dad Day, how, there's a small percentage of fathers or dads that are stay-at-home dads, and it's growing, right? But I know a lot of my friends who were mothers that were in the workspace had difficult decisions to make. Do I stay in the workspace, right? And some didn't have a choice because they had to be able to pay the bills. Or am I a stay-at-home mother? And all of the negative connotations that society has when you're trying to re-enter the workplace when you've been a stay-at-home mother. What was the process that you and Sarah went through to determine that Sarah would continue to work, you would be a stay-at-home father? And what stories are you telling yourself about that right now as we speak?
So the process, it wasn't really anything, at least for the two of us, that was a huge curveball. And we had not necessarily planned it this way, but even years ago, we had joked about like, if we ever have children, like she would want to go back to work full time again at some point. Like she's pretty much like, that stay-at-home mom business is not for me. Like it might work for some, but it's just, Like,
I
it's
love
not,
how clear she is in that. I love it.
yeah, like she was just like, it's just not, it's not her cup of tea. And I was like, that's fine. And then I like floated the idea, like, what do you think about like if I did that? Like, would that be so weird? And she was like, no. She's like, I actually think you'd be really good at it. Like, you
Mhm.
might eventually just get really bored. That might be the thing. Like, in terms of like, do the daddy and the caretaking stuff, that routine day to day, right? Like, you might get bored with that day to day, but she was like, I think between the two of us as people, she was like, Ed, you're better suited for that, not than she was. And I was like, I don't disagree with you. And I was like, and I think you're right. I will get bored. So when push came to shove, and when I had gotten 5 days paternity, I was going to try to. The initial plan was to take New Jersey has benefits for parents, and so um, I was going to take time off from work and get compensated through the state. But eventually, it just felt like the pressures and the demands of whatever time I was devoted to my workplace, and the pressures and the demands that were at home, not just about caretaking Ernie, caretaking Sarah in the first few weeks
Yes.
after giving birth. Like, she has gone through physical trauma in ways that I can't even imagine what that must feel like. And for her to be primary caretaker at home while I'm off working, even if I'm working from home, just didn't sit well with me. And watching her really struggle, watching Ernie try to figure out what's life all about outside of mommy's womb, I couldn't just sit back and say, well, you know what? I've got to bring the money in, so I got to keep working. Like, for me, I felt like, let's take a step back and identify what's most important to me right now.
Mm.
And that was Sarah and Ernie. Easy answer. And their physical health and their well-beings. Easily, that was what's most important to me. And so, what's competing for what's most important? That day job. So I had to walk away from the day job. It was that clear. And if to me, I felt like if I walked away in a few months, I could hopefully engage in finding more coaching clients, training and development workshops to facilitate, consulting gigs, different things like that. That I felt like I could still supplement the income that Sarah was bringing by doing some of that, and also kind of mixing up my day so that I wouldn't be overly bored.
Sure.
I felt like that could work, and it made me and us really begin to think about, what does work have to look like? And it doesn't have to look like the 9 to 5. And on some level, we're privileged enough to be able to shape what that looks like. And so I'm kind of a la carting it at the moment, right? I'm picking pieces and filling up my days with work that's fulfilling to me, and also allows me to schedule time so that I'm relatively present with Ernie, um, seeing him, holding him, changing his diapers, feeding him, bathing him, doing all of that stuff amidst that. So it's kind of been an evolving process, and it will probably continue to be so.
Mhm.
Like, the roles that we have now don't necessarily mean that it'll be the roles that we have forever,
Yeah.
but it works now, and I think it's going to be a rolling conversation.
Well, I'm curious, as someone who does not have children and who has not had to make that decision, you've talked about the technical aspects of making that decision in the process. What are the mental aspects? Like, how do you see yourself and how do you think others see you? And does that, if at all, impact how you show up?
It does, because one of the things that I've, always struggled with was managing my own insecurity, or largely around how other people see me.
Mm.
Um, and as largely a stay-at-home father, I know what that means for me authentically,
Yeah.
but I can't control what the world makes meaning of that idea about me now, right? Like, I'm a stay-at-home father. That's the noun that people think of me with. What are the adjectives that come up for people? And what implications does that have on connecting with me, um, working with me down the line, hiring me potentially at some point in the future? I don't know. So there were moments where I struggled with that, and I wondered about that. But I always feel like I can't go wrong when I, one, move towards what's most important to me, which is my family, and then two, where do I feel most comfortable in my own skin in this moment?
Mm.
Right? Like, am I trying to chase this moving target?
Yeah.
Or am I just trying to be comfortable with me right now and taking care of the responsibilities in front of me? And when I felt like I can do that, I felt like I can put those voices in my head that are telling me that it's going to impact future job prospects. People are going to think I don't have the chops. All of those messages and ideas I kind of quieted down and dealt with, because I said, I'm intentionally choosing this, and I'm saying no to that for this period of my life, for this season. And
Yeah.
this season won't last forever, right? So there'll be a time where I have to refigure all that out. But I know why I did what I did. I'm doing this all with eyes wide open, and hopefully when that time comes and I speak to people who want to work with me, they'll be open and they will understand that that's a choice I made. And it wasn't because I couldn't cut it or any of that, right? Like, and I think I've done a lot of work inside for myself to help me, again. Hopefully, I'm not just sweeping that feeling under the rug. Hopefully, I've actually dealt with that insecurity, and it's something, again, like I said, eyes wide open. I know which direction I'm choosing intentionally to go in, and I know what I'm saying yes to, and I have a very clear idea of what I'm saying no to for now.
Well, I appreciate the intentionality that you have. And I wonder, like, how many people have the agency and the process and the support that you have? Like, right? How many people feel like what you just shared is them and they just don't have an
Yeah.
outlet to be okay with choosing to stay at home or to be okay with being in grief as they're learning how to be parents in this space? And so, what are some things that you can share to support? Like, how do you navigate this? And I don't know. Like, right, I am not a parent, and so I don't know for those people, because I suspect that it's not just a handful of people. I think it's probably more people than not are going through their own journey as they become parents, whether they chose to or it's a surprise, right? And how do you navigate this space?
I think one thing I've learned, and I would share with others, is that there's no one right way. I think sometimes we kind of live in this like Instagram generation, and everything looks so nice, and everything looks like everything always looks like everyone knows how to do it all, right? And parenting is no different, right? And I actually unfollowed any of the parenting accounts that I had followed in the beginning, because everything that they shared made it seem as if here's the way to do it. And you know then they have a smiling child, there's happy parents, or a sleeping baby, and I'm like, oh, first of all, Ernie doesn't sleep well. I look miserable. Like, I don't sleep. I'm angry half the time. Right? Right? Like, I'm going through all sorts of stuff personally. And you know the relationship I have with Sarah is rough right now because we're not seeing eye to eye on anything, and we're not sleeping, so we're both annoyed. She's physically going through hell and back. And so it's like there's no one way. You got to figure out what works for you. And in regards to parenting, I kind of feel like it's trial and error, which is not a great answer, but there's not a way to copycat somebody else, right? Like, it's not like sports where you watch somebody's system, and like the New England Patriots, they did it one way and then you try to copycat what they did. I don't think that works with parenting, because your child is unique, and even at a young tender age, they're so unique. And so to figure out how to pay attention to that child, and figure out what do they need in the moment, and then figure out what do you need in that moment, and what does your partner need in that moment, and to have the humility to then be able to ask for help. And I think if you're blessed to have a village and a community around you, my strong encouragement would be use that village and use that community. Be be humble enough to ask for help. As a parent, we're not supposed to know it all, and we're not supposed to do it all. I think.
Yeah.
I think we're supposed to lean on others. We're not supposed to hold that child all day long, right? like pass that child. Um, I think that's that's something that I have slowly learned to do more of, is to ask for help. It's not a muscle that comes easy for me. It's actually one that I struggle with, but it's one that I have learned to utilize more and more, is just to ask for help. And when help comes, not rejecting it. Because
Mm,
there's a way that we sometimes we when help does come, we go, no, I'm good. I'm okay. I got this, and I don't, right? And so with parenting specifically, when help comes, be a gracious receiver. When someone gives, be a gracious receiver. And that could be free meals, because Lord knows you're not going to be making your home cooked meals very often, because you will just need to eat whatever is in front of you, and it's going to be functional. It's going to be a functional meal, and you're going to just move on. And that's what it is. And so for me, I think try to really get to know your child. What are their pattern? Not necessarily patterns, but who are they, and try to meet them where they are that way, even at that young age. And do the same for yourself. Do the same for your partner. And when help comes, receive it. And if it doesn't come, and if you have a community and a village around you, please ask for help. That is such an important thing. And I know that for me, certain friends of mine, certain fathers, friends of mine, who've reached out to me and said, Ed, if you ever need to talk, I know that being a stay-at-home dad, or just even being a parent, sometimes can be lonely.
yeah.
Like, I'll give you 5 minutes of conversation, or just, you want to talk about baseball or whatever, and whatever you need, let's do it. Just give me a buzz. And those moments have meant the most to me, throughout this time for me, because it lets me know that someone's there thinking of me and considering my experience of it all.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Ask for help, I think, is really relatable in so many different ways, certainly with parenthood. And as you were talking, Edward, I'm just thinking about all those different stories that we have, um, and just being human, right?
Hmm.
Allowing yourself to be human, to make mistakes and recover again. Like how I think parents think about their children, like the biggest gift that they've had in their lives, and there's going to be mistakes, right? But we learn from mistakes, and the children learn from mistakes. And I think so often growing up in different households and talking to friends, so often it was like, oh, we expected somebody else to have this perfect life. Like, but we don't know
Hmm.
what goes on behind closed doors. And I wish that we could normalize just being able to be okay with the messiness. Like there's so
Yes.
much beauty in the messiness. And I think it feels like parents don't oftentimes, they're not given the agency and the permission to be messy and to know that they're learning along the way. And I think it's the biggest gift you could ever give to your children, if they can
Mm.
see you learn how to be messy and to navigate the messiness and to be able to course correct along the way. It's the biggest gift that you can give to your child. And so I thank you for these messages. So many more questions that I have for you. And we will get to some of those questions with Edward Kim as we celebrate and honor National Play with Dad Day here on Unlocking the Club. We will be right back in a moment with the back nine. Welcome back to Unlocking the Club. We're here on the back nine with Edward Kim. I'm your host, Angela Taylor, and we're talking about fatherhood, stay-at-home dads, and just parenting in general. And I'm just really curious, as someone who doesn't have children, I can be a cousin to many, and friend to those that have children from a distance as they take their kids back home at the end of the day after a play date. But Edward, I think one of the questions I have for you is we're mutual sports fanatics. And, something that came up a couple of years ago when Kobe Bryant died was
Mhm.
this kind of hashtag girl dad, right? And it was this sense of pride when fathers were showing up doing something with their daughters. And while I appreciated the energy behind it, right, I was conflicted, right? Because it felt like some of it was performative. And you and
Mm.
I are in the equity inclusion space, and there's so much performance art that is taking place these days, where it felt like, okay, I'm just going to throw a hashtag and take a picture with my daughter and say that's enough. but being present in your child's life for parents, men and women, is incredibly important. What's your sense of, that kind of that energy behind Girl Dad?
I think I would agree with you. It's like we're glorifying what it felt like to me also was like that we're glorifying parents who are deciding to do this, all like fathers who are all of a sudden going to spend time with their daughters as if now it was the trendy thing to do, when it was the right thing to do all along, not just for your daughter but your son, right? Like for any parent to spend time with their child, right? Like it never started, it was never not trendy to spend time with your child. Like that should be a baseline of becoming a parent, right? Like I have a child, I'm going to spend time with them. And you know, so I think it did feel performative. It does feel like we're glorifying a behavior that should have been normal and expected all along,
Mhm.
that all of a sudden became like, oh, look, like I'm somehow supporting, like Kobe's legacy like this. And it's like, are we? Is that like, I don't, I have a hard time thinking that Kobe would be like, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That's exactly what you're doing. Right? Like, I don't think that's what his response would be, right? Like, so yeah, no, I kind of agree with you. It did then feel performative, and and I think that's one of the things that like fatherhood for me is really about. It's all the moments not on the hashtag, not on the Instagram. It's all the moments behind the scenes that nobody gets to see, that are probably the most important moments. All the hard moments are the important moments, right? Like one of the best points of advice somebody told me about relationships, and I think this works with kids also, is like when you can be there for your child or your spouse or a friend in their worst, you can be there for them at their best, because everybody is totally down to be with somebody at their best.
Yeah.
The real friends, the few friends that will stick with you at your ugliest, those are the people that you stay with. And I think similarly with children, it's like for me, it's like the stripes that I earned for being a father are earned in those moments when it's hard, when it's easier to be like, hey Sarah, can you take this one? No, like I'll take that one,
Yeah.
because you're my son, I'm your father, and I love you, right? Like, and sometimes I have to be that intentional, that like almost mechanical about it.
Yeah.
But to me, that's the good stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like that's where the good stuff is.
That is. And I think about, I have this juxtaposition of, the stories I shared about that I remember about my father. Like, right. Like it wasn't only the kind of magnificent interactions. It was the day-to-day
Yes.
routine that, will linger with me to this day. And on the other end of that coin with my mother, the things I miss most aren't
Mm.
those magnificent once in a lifetime experiences we had. It was, sharing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and watching Days of Our Lives. Like, right, it was these ordinary moments that really do show love, right, to your children. And so I appreciate and applaud how you value those ordinary moments with Ernie,
Mm.
because that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, those are the things that he'll know who he is. He'll know that he was loved through those ordinary moments. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be Instagrammable, right?
Yeah.
It just is that you're present. So I appreciate you sharing that. And so as I think about, right, the journey that you're on, becoming this father figure, right? Besides your own home, Edward, what's the place that you can feel safest to be yourself, like, and honest and candid about what's going on with you?
So one is definitely, like you said, in my own home for sure. And I think home has been redefined for me in my life as really wherever Sarah is, right?
Mhm.
So geographically, it doesn't matter anymore. It's just about the presence and the relationships that I carry with me. That creates the feeling of home. So that's certainly a big one. And I think another one, and I had to kind of quickly think in my head about this one. I automatically had thought to myself that who is it that I spent a lot of time with over the years and built these crazy bonds of friendship with over the years that creates that feeling? But it may not be the length of relationship that creates that feeling. Sometimes it's, you know, like spending time with yourself and some of our colleagues in some Zoom calls. Those have felt for me tremendously generative and tremendously just like I could just breathe and I could just be easy and I could just be me. And if I do this or if I do that, if I say this or I say that, like it's okay. And somebody will listen and they will comment or ask a question or so I think some of those moments have been really cool for me to be like just to feel comfortable in my own skin, which that's a phrase that I like to use.
Yeah.
Some of those moments where you and our colleagues have spent, together on some Zoom calls on a monthly basis, those have actually been really great for me these past few months. So that's one that comes to mind. And it's not the length of relationship there,
Mm.
but it's trusting that people are being curious and open with one another, not agreeing or disagreeing with one another, but curious and open. And that for me has created like I have really enjoyed being part of that community over the past, I guess a year and change now, but much more so over the past few months where I've kind of been my time and energy has been really dominated by Ernie, and
Yeah.
so it has really the light has been much brighter on that hour or hour and a half every month past few months for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's so important. Like it's cathartic to a certain extent. And it's one of the
Hmm.
things I'm hoping to create out of Unlocking the Club is so rarely are we invited into spaces where we can just be and where we're seen and heard in all of our stuff, right? And I think it's so important for us to find those spaces and to create those spaces for others
Mm. Yes.
because life is exhausting. Like, right, we always like it feels like we are taught to perform, right? So as soon as you get up in the
Yes.
morning, like you have to put on a smiley face, comb your hair, get dressed up, and put on this perfect, like, right, picture of what your
Hmm.
life is like. And it's so nice to be in a space where perfection is not required, and
Yes.
exploration is encouraged and curiosity is appreciated. So I agree with you on that, for sure. What's
Yeah.
one of those things that when you think about being a father, um, that and you think about the next 60 years, like, right,
Hmm.
of being Ernie's father and navigating plus, that you enter with trepidation.
So what is it that I enter with trepidation? I think one of the things that has kind of like I feel it a little bit because he's going through separation anxiety right now with me and with Sarah. And when I think about so Sarah and I, when we talk, we acknowledge to each other that our job as parents, and this is not by no means for anybody else, but for us, we've discussed and we feel like our job as parents is to prepare him to leave our house, like to leave the nest, whether on a real level or on a metaphorical level, but to best prepare him to live in this world and to leave the comforts of our home and the safety of our home and our care. I know that at some point, and we're a bit down the line for that, but I wonder how I'll respond to that. And I imagine that it's going to be painful and joyous at the same time. Um, like almost like harvesting crops in a garden that you've taken care of for a season. Um, but that's something that I think about, right? Because watch him. I can't watch him even when he's younger, by the way, like when he goes to school, when he does all these things. So I guess I can push that timeline even earlier,
Yeah.
right? I guess for me, it's really about like the moment I know I have to give up control around his safety and his well-being and all that stuff, which could mean daycare, which could mean, school, what, any of those things. There's probably going to be some major trepidation on my part, and but I think it's unavoidable.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's real talk right there, right? Is particularly because the world we're now living in, right?
Yep.
And all you know about that world and how it is not necessarily safe for everybody, for sure. Well, considering that, you navigate a lot of different spaces and places. You live on the East Coast, right? You love sports, first time father, all these different things. When you think about the world that we live in and the spaces that you navigate, what's the story that needs to be told?
So I think I don't know that I could pinpoint any one story that needs to be told, and I think my mindset a lot of times is the recognition that there are so many stories,
Mm.
and yet how many of those stories are untold. I think that to me is the thing. And like I was the kid when I was young, like that would be walking up and down my street, and somebody's house light would be on, and I would in my head just be like, I wonder what's happening inside that house. I wonder what conversations are happening there. And I was just so curious about what that was and what meaning that was, or what's a side of that person that maybe I have seen on my block for years, but that inside the comforts of their own home,
Yeah.
a different side comes out, right? Like, what's that story? I want to know that. But I think about, like, as you said, spaces that I navigate, and I wonder whether sometimes the work we do is the work we do doesn't necessarily always unpack and allow a story of a real human being to be told. And I just wonder how many stories are untold. And I think we all deserve to tell that story. At least those who want to tell the story should have that opportunity. And it kind of breaks my heart to wonder, like, who's holding that in for whatever the reason, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this conversation, right, is one of the catalysts for that. Is like we feel like you only want to share your story if it's going to be received well, or if it's this perfect
mhm,
little box, or it fits this profile that somehow, in dominant culture feels like it's acceptable. And I think that that's important. Is all stories are so informative and special in their own regard, and so
yeah,
it's incumbent on all of us individually and collectively to make sure that we create space for us to share our story with others and for others to know that they can share theirs with us. And I'm grateful to you for kind of opening that up, and would love for you to share with our listeners, Edward, what some of the projects you're working on. I know one that kind of revolves around this topic we've been talking about in parenthood in particular, but any projects you're working on and where our listeners can find you.
sure. Right. So, like, I'm currently in the process of becoming a certified coach in parental leadership, and I'm excited to do that because it seems to be an area that's been rather ignored. And when we think about parental leave, it's not just about maintenance. Like, I like the language of this. It's parental leave leadership, and when we think leadership, it's all about influence. And so that influence has to start with your own journey first and then go out to everybody else. But in that space, when you become a parent, at least this has been my experience, you're left raw and you're left completely open to so much. That's really a fertile time to develop. And yes, you don't have that much time because you're sleep deprived, you're taking care of X, Y, and Z,
Mm.
but there is still space to intentionally devote some time, even if it's just a little time, to your own development, to your own leadership, and those skill sets, those mindsets, um, that will be helpful for you in your own home and helpful for you in whatever professional space that you're navigating. Um, so that part is really important to me, and not just working with individuals, either the birthing parent or the partner, but also hopefully working with organizations who want to provide this value to their people, right? Like, if you know that your one of your employees are going on leave, and as they go on leave there's a question mark around whether they're going to return, offer them this service, offer them this opportunity to be provided with a coach to help them navigate this transition around this major change in their life. That will help them want to return to that same workplace, right? Like somebody, I was talking to somebody today and they were like, it's like an insurance policy,
Mm.
right? Hopefully they use that as an insurance policy so that you return. And I'm not saying this in any sort of like schemish kind of way to like help people stay at work. If it's really not right, then you leave. That's an easy decision. But you shouldn't leave because you're not being supported through your workplace. And if there's organizations that want to provide this, those are the organizations that I want to work with to create a little bit of structure, support their managers, help them, guide them through the conversations, know what to ask, know what to do, because there's a lot of managers who frankly don't know what to do because they don't know what to do. It's not that they're trying to be difficult or combative with a parent, or somebody who is having a child. They don't know what they don't know, right? So there's people like myself and a cohort of other people right now getting trained in how do you support organizations and leaders through this process so that you best create scenarios for individuals and organizations. So that's the big one that I'm working on, and so I'll be certified early next year, hopefully around February, March. And then other things that I'm working on, I'm trying to continue to build up some of my own business for measured leadership. So that's a piece that I'm always excited about to do, trainings and workshops for people and groups. That's the piece that I enjoy doing. And you know, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the work that I do is about building connection,
Mm.
right? And so I try to look at what are the spaces where connection lacks. So one of the spaces that I've been exploring recently is the church. I think church is a place of community, but doesn't always have the connection. So people leave the church and don't want to be associated with the church, um, amidst a lot of other stuff that churches are often involved with
Sure.
these days, right? But I think there's an opportunity to help create connection. And so I don't have any solid projects, but I've been trying to work with religious organizations and not just churches, but religious organizations as a whole, because I think those are um, places people seek safety, people seek trust in those places, people seek connection and community. These are places full of people, and we're messy, like you said, right? So everyone could use a little bit of training and development as it relates to how do I create connection in these spaces, not just how do I learn about my faith, but within that place of faith, how do I foster curiosity? How do I make the environment more comfortable? Right? There's things that we can do that will enhance the community and the time spent in these places. I believe that was like a one big area that I thought about as like, where's a place of connection that we don't find connection in? And I'm like, oh, easy one for
Sure.
me, church.
Yeah. No, that's such a great observation. Well, and kudos to you for endeavoring to navigate both of those spaces, because I agree, those are the stories that aren't being told. Like, right, is this parental leave? I think that it feels like a thing and a commodity, not an experience that for generations people have gone through, but we really haven't um, dissected it in a way that we can all learn and grow through it and navigate it
Mm,
differently in wellness. And so I'm glad that you're going to be doing that coaching, and then certainly the work that you continue to do with measured leadership. I think the church is a really interesting space to explore these connections, or lack thereof,
yeah.
that we all can have as individuals. And so, Edward Kim, thank you so much for unlocking vulnerability and parenthood and stay-at-home fathers and all of those things today on Unlocking the Club. Appreciate you being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Angela. I am humbled and flattered to be here as your guest.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow. Another great episode of Unlocking the Club. Thank you so much to Edward Kim for joining us today and talking about a topic that I know couldn't have been easy to discuss, but certainly one that so many families and parents are navigating and trying to feel like, how can you be in wellness as you navigate this new journey that you're on as a first time parent or stay at home mom or dad or parent. And so I'm grateful to Edward for sharing that insight and that perspective, and really the honesty about how he is grieving his life and how he's navigating that grief to be the best father he can be to Ernie, who is a darling little boy. And I know there's going to be plenty of those play days with dad in that family. And I hope you all, as you listen to this episode, for those of you that are father figures or stay-at-home parents, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, that you saw yourself in that and you realize that you're not alone with the things that you may be feeling in this perfect Instagrammable parent world that we live in, and to find a club that people see and hear and understand exactly what you're going through, because it does matter. And you can be the best parents that you can be if you honestly can share those stories and acknowledge what you may be navigating on your own along the way. And so thanks again to Edward Kim. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Unlocking the Club. If you want to continue the conversation, we will be over on our Facebook page, the Codebreakers Lounge, continuing this discussion and unpacking more discussions about parenthood and being a stay-at-home parent, or what that whole journey is like. So for my crew here at Unlocking the Club, I'm your host, Angela Taylor. I'm so grateful that you all continue to join us on this journey as we try to unlock a myriad of different clubs that we're all navigating. Until next time in our next episode, be well.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite streaming platform so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social media, where you'll hear about future guests, access special features, and connect with this amazing community. Head on over there and let us know how you are unlocking the club. Until next time, peace.